Hey guys, Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, and we are continuing in the history of the high power pistol. Last session we had just talked about the fact that the British version, the Canadian version of the high powers actually were different pistols somewhat than the FN version was. The premise that I want to build for you here is this, is if you had the blueprints for the Inglis high power, you still can't make the Belgium high power. And it might seem like it would be a short leap, but you would be very, very, very surprised. The high power, technologically, the high power has a long list of very, very close margin design issues. And they're not necessarily, quote, issues, but they don't leave any room for margins and tolerances that are not exacting. The 1911 pistol was finished by a different designer. And he not only made things run like a Swiss watch, but he made things run like a Swiss watch, even if they were full of mud and sand and whatever. In other words, John Browning true designs usually have a lot of margin. So in other words, the springs can start weakening and this thing will still work. Or you can have a 1911 and you do it like this and you hear the slide rattling on the frame and you slam a magazine in there and start pulling the trigger and it just runs. It may not be accurate, but you know, they're just that way. And this was a bit of a difference between the European designing that we've noticed and John Browning's designing, just kind of generally, is John Browning's designs, his personal designs, these things will work for quite a range on either side of perfect in terms of most of the parts and the slide to the frame fit and everything like that. The high power pistol is made with much, much, much closer tolerances. It's a smaller design. It is almost as thin as a 1911. So anyway, we're going to continue on here. Production returned to Belgium after we're on Wikipedia in the Browning high power page, and this is the third paragraph. Production returned to Belgium after the war. Actually, production continued even when Hitler occupied the factory there in 1944 or 1945. Nonetheless, the term high power has been the most commonly used in articles over the past decades, regardless of the year of manufacture. Versions of the handgun continued to be made at the FN factory in Belgium under Wehrmacht control. Sorry about the pronunciation, with the design, the designation 9mm pistole, or not sure how they would have pronounced that. Okay, we're going to continue on. Development. The Browning high power was designed in response to a French military requirement for a new service pistol, the Grand Rendement, French for high yield, or alternatively grande puissance, literally high power. The French military required that. Now, this is important to realize because what this is telling us is that the high power was finished to these, the influence of how the high power came to be and how it was finished was much based on meeting the requirements of the French military, in that they wanted the arm must be compact. The magazine have a capacity of at least 10 rounds. The gun needed to have a magazine disconnect device, an external hammer, and a positive, I'm assuming manual safety, or we would say a positive trigger lockout. The gun should be robust and simple to disassemble and reassemble. in terms of simplicity to disassemble and reassemble, the high power, especially with the SFS system on today, is the easiest disassembly, reassembly, at least field stripping for normal cleaning. The gun be capable of killing a man at 50 meters. The last criterion was seen to demand a caliber of 9mm or larger, a bullet mass of around 8 grams or 123.5 grains, and a muzzle velocity of 300 meters per second or 1,148 feet per second. It was to accomplish all of this at a weight not exceeding 2.2 pounds or 1 kilogram. The FN commissioned John Browning to design a new military sidearm conforming to this specification. Browning had previously sold the rights to his successful M1911 U.S. Army automatic pistol to Colt's Patent Firearms, and was therefore forced to design an entirely new pistol while working around the M1911 patents. This doesn't conform with a lot of history that we've read, saying that John Browning understood the direction the winds were blowing as far as more capacity, and that the European winds were not blowing in the direction of the 45. He had invented that because that's what conformed to the United States requirement for their new sidearm when the 1911 was chosen. Our understanding was he understood the way the winds were blowing as far as higher capacity, and it wasn't blowing towards a 45 caliber, that kind of a diameter of a projectile, and he had gotten started on the high power pistol. Our understanding was that Dieudonné Save finished the high power as a result of FN was answering this request for a handgun that met those specifications, but this was getting into the later years. But we're going to read on and see how this is described here. Browning had previously sold the rights to his successful 1911 U.S. Army automatic pistol to Colt's Patent Firearms, and was therefore forced to design an entirely new pistol while working around the 1911 patents. Browning built 2 different prototypes for the project in Utah and filed the patent for this pistol in the United States on the 28th of June 1923, granted on the 22nd of February 1927. Wow, 3.5 years. The patent office wasn't moving very fast in those days either. One was a simple blowback design, so this would have been nothing like today's high power, while the other was operated with a locked breech recoil system. Both prototypes utilized the new staggered magazine design by designer Dieudonné Save to increase capacity without unduly increasing the pistol's grip size or magazine length. So this is just the result of John Browning making the grip frame the width that he did. Dieudonné Save assumed that he must have been intending to stagger the ammunition. This is the only thing that gave Dieudonné Save the idea that that was even possible. Was he believed that John Browning had envisioned that. So it was actually Dieudonné Save that created the first double stack or stagger stacked magazine. The locked breech design was selected for further development and testing. This model was striker fired and featured a double column magazine that held 16 rounds. The design was refined through several trials held by the Versailles Trial Commission. In 1928, when the patents for the Colt 1911 had expired, was huge. When the 1911 patents expired, Dieudonné Save, see the kind of the gloves were off. Mr. Browning had passed away. Now he could go back to John Browning some of the things that he had done and used in the 1911 and employ those. Dieudonné Save integrated many of the Colt's previously patented features into the Grand Rendement design in the Save Browning model of 1928. So again, this is an evolution. This version featured the removable barrel bushing and takedown sequence of the Colt 1911. So pre-final high power 1935 version, there was another version that had a barrel bushing like 1911 style to it. By 1931, the Browning high power design incorporated a shortened 13-round magazine, a curved rear grip strap, and a barrel bushing that was integral to the slide assembly. By 1934, the high power design was complete and ready to be produced. It was first adopted by Belgium for military service in 1935 as the Browning P35. Ultimately, France decided not to adopt the pistol, instead selecting the conceptually similar but lower capacity Model 1935 pistol. Okay, so that is kind of how and why it came to be. I think in the article here there's a little bit of a mistake. When France wanted to have a new service pistol, the FN folks and Dieudonné Save went looking at what they had to work with, and specifically what John Browning had started, and it was a lot of the material that eventually became the high power. One of the things that would have been possible to have used once the patents fell away for the 1911 would have been John Browning's 1911 internal extractor, like is in this 1911. The original high power pistols, the earliest ones, had John Browning's internal extractor. We'll be talking about this subject much more in depth in the sessions coming ahead. But this was a big point in history because it allowed the use of some of John Browning's work to now come back into the high power. Of the things we know John Browning did not design would have been the trigger subassembly, including the magazine disconnect. John Browning did not do that. And it's been one of the areas of the high power pistol that people have tinkered with and refined and optimized and smoothed up, and as long as the high power pistol has been around, I think. So continuing on the design, the Browning high power has undergone continuous refinement by FN since its introduction. The pistols were originally made in two models: an ordinary model with fixed sights and an adjustable rear sight model. This was the tangent type rear sight, and a slotted grip. So the back straps were slotted here, and that was for attaching a wooden shoulder stock. These are high value collector's items today. The adjustable sights are still available on commercial versions of the high power, or they were, although the shoulder stock mounts were discontinued during World War II. In 1962, the design was modified to replace the internal extractor with an external extractor, improving reliability. And we will take exception with this paragraph completely. It has not been our experience that the external extractor in real life improved reliability. The original high power extractor, the internal extractor design, that is John Browning's 1911 extractor. And if you haven't noticed, not a lot of people have been trying to mess with that and change it and think they can better it. It is also back in these days with the technology they had for manufacturing, it was also an expensive part to manufacture. It was a difficult part in some ways to tune in the factory. Our experience in a great number of older high powers that have come through our service center, also with Inglis high powers, which are an internal extractor design, the Ishapur Indian-made high powers, which we actually have some experience with, is that same Inglis extractor design. Our experience has been John Browning's extractor design was an excellent, highly reliable extractor design. There was a strong reason to change it. The strong reason to change it was cost to produce and cost to assemble. The external extractor, our experience has been 99% of the time this thing is drop in, put in the spring, put in the extractor, drive in the pin, and it works, and it's perfect. The longevity of this part we have found does not compare to the original John Browning designed internal extractor. And that's not to say that the external extractor models are not great. They are. But this did not improve reliability. There is talk of well, if you adjust the internal extractor wrong, you can break it. We have adjusted a lot of them, and we've never broken one and never had one break. If you were to take a look at that part, the way that it's designed, the way that it seats into the slide, it is virtually impossible. You would have to get some kind of a machine to bend the arm, which is actually a spring, but it's a thick spring and it's very difficult to bend. You'd have to do this in a vise, and it would have to be just, I don't even know how you would get it into the pistol to get the angle to where it would headlong or headbutt into the cartridge casing. It doesn't, I question whether or not that's even possible, but I can say that would be an expensive part to produce. It would be expensive during assembly to tune that part for final tuning and for proper function. However, when they are made correctly and it's high quality production and it is good final fit and finish, this was a factor, the internal extractor. It was a factor in the popularity that just grew and grew and grew for the high power pistols, through the 40s and into the 50s and into the early 60s. That internal extractor created a highly, highly reliable handgun. So we would take exception with what this says about the external extractor improved reliability, but we have a lot of reference points at BHSpringSolutions for why we take exception with it, and it is in 2020 we get to test what was made in 1960, because we get a lot of these things sent to us, and we get to test what was made in 1980, and we see what is coming to us with some sort of extraction problems or function problems, and it's typically the external extractor models that we have come to us with function problems. Normally when we get internal extractor models, the finish is just gone because it's like 1950 or 1955 or whenever it is. And it's coming in for a facelift. But normally these things are still not having hiccups as far as extraction failure problems. So time has not supported this paragraph that I just read to you. We're going to try one more paragraph here. Standard high powers are based on single action design. Unlike modern double action semi-automatic pistols, the high powers trigger is not connected to the hammer. That's true. If a double action pistol is carried with the hammer down, with a round in the chamber and a loaded magazine installed, the shooter may fire the pistol either by simply squeezing the trigger or by pulling the hammer back to the cock position and then squeezing the trigger. In contrast, a single action pistol can only be fired with the hammer in the cock position. This is generally done with a loaded magazine is inserted and the slide cycled by hand. In common with the 1911, the high power is therefore typically carried with the hammer cocked, or a round in the chamber and the safety catch on, a carry mode often called cocked and locked in the United States, or made ready in the UK, or sometimes called condition 1. We're going to end right there. We'll pick back up with the last paragraph in that section in the next session. Thanks for watching. Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC.